Hello, welcome back to the studio. This week, Reflections of Gold, a Bob Ross classic. I did my best on it, but there were some things I wasn't very pleased with. I did a nice sky. I fixed it just like Bob fixed his, and I did a nice background. I used a half-round brush this week as well, just to show you how to do some great highlights. I also made a mess of this tree. I'll show you how I took it all apart and fixed it. So, sit tight. Lots of great information to come.
As you saw from the thumbnail, today we're going to be painting this Bob Ross classic, Reflections of Gold. It's a classic Bob Ross painting that he did in an oval, but I fancied to do this on an oblong canvas, and I've taped off a border of about 1 inch. Now, I've also included a couple of pins here to get the distances right for the horizon line, but don't forget the proportions. It's about 2/3 of the top to about 1/3 of the bottom of an oval. So I've set my pins to about 1/3 up from the bottom and about 2/3 from the top. It's very approximate and we can move things up and down a little. This is going to be a wet on wet oil painting, and I'm going to be using this product, Bob Ross Liquid White Oil Paint. The idea is to apply a very thin even coat to the entire surface of the canvas and then use the canvas as a place to blend our paints. You can substitute by using linseed oil and some titanium white, but well, it's not quite the same. I keep mine in a small airtight container, and I can use this to easily apply some using an old Bob Ross landscape brush. Now, a useful tip here: if you put a taped border on, be careful when you get to those edges. Try and brush inwards, not outwards. You'll force the paint under the edge of the tape and well, it'll get into a bit of a pickle. Now, let's apply a thin even coat to the entire canvas. I do it section by section. I find that's easier. Now finish off using some long flat strokes, top to bottom and side to side, to really even out the coverage.
So having covered my canvas with a thin even coat of liquid white, let's test it. For this I'm going to use my fingerprints. Just use a different finger in a different part of the canvas and just have a quick check. We want to see nice, clean, clear fingerprints, not completely filled with paint. If they look a little bit like that, well, we've been a bit mean with it. There's not quite enough on there and the painting will get a little bit dry. You'll struggle to make it blend. If, however, it looks like that, you dipped it in some ice cream, well, that's a bit too wet and everything you paint on there will go very mushy. Very hard to make your highlights stick. I think these two problems are the main problems people have when they're starting to learn to paint wet on wet, particularly in the Bob Ross style. Too dry, but more likely too wet. Now, we know how to test our canvas. Let's rub out my fingerprints and put some colour on the canvas. I'm going to carry on using this old Bob Ross 1-inch landscape brush. The problem is it's covered in liquid white. And I don't want to add any more to my painting, so the first thing I want to do is give that a bit of a dry clean. Just take off all the excess, give it a nice dry clean. Again, I suspect some people do this, but they forget to wipe their brush enough, and they carry a lot of white paint back onto their canvas. Now, let's have a quick look at our palette. I set out the opening colours for our sky. Titanium white, some Prussian blue, I think I need some black as well, that'll come in a moment. Cad yellow, Indian yellow and some bright red. The first colour I want is a lovely golden glow. Indian yellow is my choice. Actually, it was Bob's choice, but I think he's got a pretty good idea what he's doing, so I'll let him guide the way. And I'm going to use both sides of my brush and pull out a little bit towards the centre of the palette. It's no good pulling it down or up, because then you'll just block the way for the other paints to get on to the palette and get into sort of play. So always sort of pull towards where your thumb is. I think that's probably the best way of doing this. And you want a good amount of Indian yellow. It's not the most powerful colour. Now the bright colour here is just up behind these trees, a little bit above our horizon line, which is where those pins are. These pins are very useful. I could have put a little pencil mark there, but I'm so used to using these little pins that, well, they'd be the first thing I always put into my canvas. It means I can pull them out later on, or I can adjust them if I need to. I like to use the entire width for a nice colour. I'll put on another band of colour next. But what should I use? Well, Bob's advice is to use cadmium yellow and red. And you have to start thinking, why does Bob put red into his skies? I'll come back for the answer in a moment. Now, before I forget, the painting is reflections of gold. So if I've got this lovely golden colour in the sky, I want some water down here and it's going to need some reflections. So press and pull down. And again, put on a bit more than you think you need. Again, careful at those taped edges. And get down to there, just brushing gently. Same at the sides, pull in. So the next colour, cad yellow. I'm going to go in same dirty brush, a touch of bright red. The question I asked, why does Bob use red in his sky? Well, it's all to do with what comes next. You see, the top of this painting is done with Prussian blue and some black. And many of you will already guess that when blue and yellow get together, we end up with a Martian green sky, don't we? So we need something to separate the two. And one of the favourite colours is red. Red works with yellow and red also works with blue. It makes a nice lavender colour. So it's friends to both those two colours. And by using red through the centre, well, it sort of acts like a bit of a barrier, a bit of a bodyguard for the yellow, and it stops the blue getting to be too much of a bully. Little crisscross strokes, because when we use little X's, you see you break up that line. But it can be quite tricky to get rid of sometimes, so you do have to do a little bit of this, and then take a stand back, because I can still see the line. I think a fresh clean brush is also a good idea. It's the other top tip I'm going to give you today is have two 1-inch brushes or two 2-inch brushes, an old one which you use for doing this sort of work, the chores, then a nice soft clean fresh one for doing blending and applying highlights. I highly recommend you get yourself two brushes. Now let's add a little more red. And of course we'll have to add some of that colour down here in the water as well. Again, make sure you overlap these, but if there's a bit more of a deck chair stripe effect here, it's no problem because we'll be brushing across this. Now, before I put that Prussian blue colour on with a touch of black, a bit of experience has taught me that I should really take a nice clean brush and do a little bit of soft blend first, because well, that blue has a habit of creeping down into here and we just don't want a green sky, so I'll blend this border as much as I need to get rid of any stripes. You can see I made it nice and zigzag to really break up those lines. And as you blend, with a piece of paper towel, give it a nice little knock off, and really want to concentrate in this central area because there are trees either side of this painting, so that's really where I'm going to be working most to get rid of any kind of obvious lines. For that Prussian blue and black colour, you might be very tempted to try and just dry clean that old 1-inch brush and then go straight into the blue colour, but well, experience has taught me one thing. Sometimes when there's lots of yellows and other colours all mixed on this brush, that adding blue isn't such a good idea. You'll contaminate your sky almost instantly. No, you either need to give this brush a wash and then dry it thoroughly so it's completely clear of anything you put on there like thinners, or have yet another old brush to use. And that's what I always keep, a few old brushes. Now, straight into that Prussian blue colour. This is a cool, strong colour. I'm going to tint it with a little touch of black. Not much, just a hint. And I'm going to go very carefully with this colour because I know that, well, there isn't much sky to cover. And this can be a bit of a bully, so we've got a little bit to do there, you see. So I'm going to start right up here in these corners. If it's too strong, I prefer it to be right up there in the corners than sort of right here in the centre where it might be difficult to get rid of it. And Bob's Midnight Black colour has a noticeably purpley sort of tint to it. So if you sort of substitute a different colour and your skies look a bit sort of flat, almost sort of dull, it might be because you don't have the nice sort of purpley sort of tint to it. So Bob's paints were very, very particular. Knock it off. But look, things go wrong sometimes. And as I often tell people, I make mistakes, accidents happen, even with the best will in the world. Sometimes you get some oopsies happening, and if they happen, well, that's actually quite a good thing sometimes, because then you can see what I would do to try and fix the situation. And no, I don't always take my canvas down and get another fresh one out and pretend nothing happened. No, I like to live with my mistakes, and if I can show you what I do to try and fix them, well, then you'll feel a lot better. If you get your sort of oopsies as well, you'll think, well, hey, after 25 years of practicing, he can still get it wrong, so it's all okay. Now, I still have that nice, really sort of strong band there, quite a greenish tint, and I'm going to stop using that brush because all it's doing is it's adding more to the problem. I'm going to switch over to my nice clean brush, where I think I can actually get away with just a light blend. Now then, how does that look from the other side of the room? What do you think? Fixed it? Maybe? Greenish hint? Yes, definitely, isn't there? What could we do? Well, what we can do is I can pick up a little more of the red colour and try and neutralise it a little bit more just through that central area. Adding a little hint of red in there, see, it suddenly gets rid of some of that green colour. It's a neat trick. Sometimes you can neutralise that green with just a hint of red. Once again, I don't want a straight line through here. So I'm going to let that red colour kind of creep up into the blue and make me a nice sort of peak. If you're enjoying my tutorial and you're getting lots of value from it, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. You can even subscribe to the channel, but definitely leave me a comment and let me know what you're struggling with. It might help me make the next video for you. Now, back to the painting. But you could put some trees across it, of course you could, but we want a really nice glow of a sky. And we're going to put white here in a minute and we're going to blend that out. So a lot of this is actually going to get a little bit sort of softened. Of course, the most obvious thing to do is we'll put a few little clouds across here. And that's a technique which you can introduce onto almost any painting. Just put a cloud or two in there. I'll stand back and have a look at it from the other side of the room and decide if I need to do any more or whether I'm okay to leave it. I'll add some blue down here in the water as well. Now, time to add that lovely glow in the sky. And I'm going to use this dirty old blending brush again. Yeah, I wouldn't, would you? No, I'm afraid you need yet another clean, dry brush. Fortunately, I've got yet another one. And I'm going to go straight into some titanium white paint. Now, top tip here. Load a generous amount onto your brush, because as soon as you apply this, it's going to start picking up colour. Now, if you're only going with a little bit of paint on your brush, then you're going to end up with a sort of a pale yellow blob in the middle of your sky, and you're going to be trying to load more white onto there, and you're just going to make a bit of a pickle of it all. So pick a point in your sky where you want it to be nice and bright. Bob had his fairly central in the middle of a nice oval. I'm probably going to go a little bit to the right hand side, just a smidge, and I'm going to start off by just really giving this a good old dab. Now you can see what I mean by putting on a good amount of white paint here, because if I'd gone in with just a little bit on my brush, well, I wouldn't have that lovely initial burst of brightness. Already my colour would be completely fading out. As you see, it is already starting to pick up that yellowness. I'm going to just simply tap this on. I'm going to let this kind of colour go out and blend a little bit. I'm going to sort of stay well away from that band at the top. Now, I did read Bob's instructions for this painting a moment ago, and I had to chuckle because in the instructions it says, once you put this bright glow on, use your nice 1-inch brush with a little white and tinted with some red to add some pinkish clouds. We don't want to get a green sky. So you see, I think Bob struggled with this painting as well. So we're all in good company. Now then, I've knocked off some of that colour. My brush is still pretty bright and clean. So I'm going to go back in and get some more white. Again, start in the centre and blend out. And I'm going to sort of go for a bit of a starburst pattern now. I've got a tree line coming through here as well. So again, I want to think about the positions of things. I don't want to keep this too small because otherwise it's never going to show up. And eventually, of course, I'm going to drop some of this colour down into the water as well. And finally, I'm going to give this a very, very light blend. I've clean dried my brush a couple of times. I'm going to just do this just to knock off any really heavy brush strokes there and to really soften up my sky. Just drop in and pull down. And then just blend this out gently to the sides. Well, I've stood back from my painting and had a good look at this sky. I think I could actually probably get away with just putting the trees in, but say Bob put in those clouds with a pinkish colour to it. I think I might do the same. I'm going to just use a little fan brush and say my titanium white's going to pick up a little bit of that yellow colour. Bob put a little touch of bright red into it just to give it a little bit of a pinkish glow. And that's what I'm going to do too. So just a little hint of pink. And I just want some nice little soft bubbly clouds. Now, remember, we've got a lot of trees coming in at the side here, and I just want to kind of pick my spot for this. So not too tight to the right. I'm going to put a little mark there, maybe a couple of little markers. So maybe a little cloud going through here that kind of ends up going through to sort of here. So kind of a little bit of a plan. Ooh, that's quite bright, isn't it? Again, you notice that I'd never really just go diving into my paintings. I always kind of put a few little markers on there, kind of get a little bit of an idea of where I think I might go. Because I find that with just taking a few seconds to kind of figure out where my painting's going to go, I don't fall into the trap of painting somewhere where I shouldn't do. I'm just using the corner of my fan brush here. I'm just going to press a little bit of paint into my painting, just kind of push and give it a little kind of squeeze. Now, there's a tendency to do lots of ups and downs when we're painting clouds, and they can look a little bit like the Loch Ness Monster. So if I find I'm going to go into those sorts of shapes, I tend to just do a few little random extra bits and pieces here and there, and that breaks up that pattern pretty well. One thing I do like to do is kind of finish my clouds with a little bit of a flattish base. Yeah, I'm going to sneak right up into the edge of that blue there, so it's not, again, not even either side. Fixes in mind. Now, 2 lumps of cloud. Should I join them up? Well, I think I should. Because if I decide I don't like them, I can always take them apart again. But I just don't want this to look too symmetrical. I dry cleaned and washed my brushes completely, because there was a lot of colour on here, and I'm going to use one of these nice brushes here, let's say dry it on a piece of paper towel, get it really nice and clean. I'm going to just get into the corner of this cloud with that little points of my brush, just those few little hairs there is all I need. And I'm just going to give this a little tap, a little flick and a little tap. Now, don't go crazy with this, it feels good, but there's lots of layers in my clouds. If I go too heavy, I'll lose a lot of lovely detail. And again, I think that's something people do, just go a little bit kind of heavy with their brushwork sometimes. They just work them a little too hard. And what happens is that they paint lovely clouds, and then they knock out all of the lovely detail. Now, you see, I did that really gently and really quickly. I didn't sit anywhere for too many seconds. I dry cleaned my brush, and super gently, just with the side of the brush. But see all this detail here, I left it all in. And what I'm doing here is I'm just rolling the fat edges of the cloud back in. Okay, if you brush out, then you get rain. Just tap those edges out a little more. I think we've got ourselves a pretty background sky. There. Now then, let's start working on those trees. And the colour I'm going to be mixing up is, well, one that I like to call mud. For the background trees, Bob suggested quite a combo of colours. Prussian blue, black, Van Dyke brown, dark sienna and alizarin crimson. Colours that I know well. Because if I've ever used all of these in combination, I always end up with mud. So, I don't know. I had a quick look at Bob's painting again a couple of times, and there's a definite brownish hue to it. So, I'm probably going to urge us to tend to use more dark sienna Van Dyke brown colours. And the blue, well, blue and brown, it makes a green colour, so I'm a little bit kind of concerned about that. Now, I've pulled out an old brush that I was using yesterday. That colour, they're running away as usual. I pulled out an old brush which I washed, and I'm going to use mainly Van Dyke and dark sienna, I think, for my background. Maybe a little hint of crimson. So it's got a nice sort of bronzy sort of colour. And I'm not going to load a lot of paint on my brush. Just a little bit. Now, see that a nice bronzy colour. Now, I'm going to put it just a hint of Prussian blue off to the side, just to see what happens. As I say, I suspect it's going to make a sort of grey-brown colour. Yeah, not far off actually. Grey-brown, I think, probably describes it quite well. And I'm not going to even use the black, because I know the black is going to turn that into a weird purple colour. So let's go with this, just a little bit of paint. And if you're ever not sure, have a scrap piece of canvas to play on, a piece of paper or something which painted with gesso, just to have a few taps. It's quite useful. Now, think about the scale of things. We don't want massive trees, we'll lose our lovely sky. And we're putting in a nice background tree over here on the right, sort of kind of holding in the trees here. So I'm going to start off with just a few gentle taps again, just to sort of frame my painting up. Put a few nice tree shapes up into here. So even at this stage, if I did something I really didn't like, I could fix it. Now you can see how grey this colour is too. I'm using a little downward tap. Let the brush sort of skid. And I'm painting sort of individual little tree shapes in here. Now, do I like this colour? Not 100% happy. Let me pull a little more dark sienna, a little more Van Dyke brown into it, give it a little tap. Because I haven't really committed to it too much. It's a little more to the brown side, which I think I prefer. More of that dark sienna colour here, I think. Again, just let the brush skid. Get my hand out of the way. And when you do that kind of touch and skid, you get these kind of lovely soft background tree shapes. And of course, when you hit that little bit of white in the background sky with that golden colour, it makes a nice sort of faded effect. Let me move my camera to the side so you get a better shot. And again, I'm just painting and dabbing and letting the brush skid a little. I'm kind of trying, again, not to fall into the trap of the symmetry thing. So you put two trees that are equal both sides. And try and paint some individual little tree type shapes in here as well. Rather than just painting like a big bank of colour that's all very much the same. Now, I'm putting out some trees over in here, just to kind of fill in the gaps. So there's a nice sort of even bank of trees here, so I don't end up with a blank. But how much of my painting I did with just almost nothing on my brush? As I say, it's a clue. I think sometimes we're tempted to kind of go a little gung-ho with our brush, load it full of paint, and then kind of start throwing on trees and things before we really get a chance to feel our way into a painting. So that's my top tip. Now, as I say, this is a sort of funny brownish colour, a little bit of a purplish tint to it, but I think it works quite well for my painting and it's super soft. Now, a few tree trunks and things to hold this all together. Before I put those tree trunks on, I realised I should have actually put in a darker bank of trees in here. These ones are the real distant fellas. So I want something a little stronger, a little darker, a little closer to us. And I I'm going to just drop these in, and if you ever think you're going to lose position, then do that. Drop in that horizon line so you don't lose it. As I say, these trees want to be a little darker, but a little stronger, and definitely going to have some tree trunks in these little fellas. Again, try not to follow the exact same line with another line of trees that mimics it. This side looks almost the same as the ones above, and it can't be helped. Sometimes they do, but I like to maybe throw in a little something like that. There we go, and just kind of really have that kind of climbing up. I'll leave this as a little ghost tree in the background. Whoops, I'm off the camera there. Let me zoom out. There we go. I got you back in shot now. I say some of these trees in the background, I call them filler trees. They are kind of just placeholders. You don't have to keep them. If you see the odd branch or whatever poking out, that's fine. And you can see I've gone into more blue and more crimson. I got some kind of abstract colours coming through in here. Darker either side, and leave this area through the centre a little paler. Something we call a light trail. In other words, the eye follows the line through the middle of your painting. For my tree branches, today I'm going to be using a synthetic brush. And I'm also going to be using some linseed oil as opposed to thinners. I'm going to a little drop of that. You just need a drop. I'm kind of going to go to the side of this Van Dyke brown and black colour here. And the reason why I'm using linseed oil today is because it's very, very warm here in the studio. It's July, and it's sort of right in the sort of start at the beginning of our summer here in the UK. And boy, it's absolutely baking. If I was to use thinners, it would dry on my palette before I even got it to my painting. So linseed oil will stay wet for a lot longer. And roll your brush on its side, roll it through the paint, and get it to a nice fine point. Remember, hold your brush far back. We're going to just drop in some nice little details here. And paint with the very tip of your brush. And say these little background trees and details here. See what happens when I put my brush and it picks up some of that background sky colour. See, it makes this lovely faded effect. I like that a lot. There's a nice dead old tree back in there, or one that's lost all its leaves. See that? I picked up some sky colour and I moved it into this tree. It's a little happy accident there. So sometimes you end up with these nice little effects without really trying too hard. There. So I've got a nice little tree there, and I'm going to highlight these trees next. For my highlights, I could use one of these, a Bob Ross landscape brush, a nice new one, with lovely soft bristles on it. But I could also use something like this. This is a Bob Ross half round brush. It's the sort of brush that Bob actually used for the original painting. Again, long, soft bristles and a really lovely shape. So I'm going to give this one a try for my highlights. In Bob's original painting, he used various shades of yellows and little touches of red for those background trees. All you've got to do is make sure you have some paint that's nice and soft and oily, because it'll stick to those lovely dark highlight sort of shadows in the background here. So I'm going to go straight into a little bit of red, a little bit of Indian yellow. And see how I push and open the brush. When you press and open the brush, it causes all the little bristles to pop apart, and each little bristle has got a little tiny dibble of paint on the end of it. Now again, think about how the light would come through these trees. I think these trees in the centre are going to be slightly brighter, and the trees on the outside are going to be slightly darker. So when we come in, just tip the brush up slightly and just use the very, very tips of the brush. Yeah, the brush has to have the paint sitting right on the tips of the bristles, and you can't afford to press too hard. If you push too hard, then the paint just runs back down into the centre of the brush. I've done the nice bright side to it, and as my brush runs out of paint, I'll do the shadow side to it. So there we go, one nice little bush. Now you're going to pick up a little colour when you do this. And the top tip here is to have a little bit of paper towel. You can just touch off any little dark bits. Let's get some more colour. Cad yellow. And if it's not quite bright enough, you can always add a tiny touch of white, but just a touch. And again, some nice bright colour coming through. Maybe hit this little bush in here. Whew, look at that. That really pops. And again, we're just looking for very fine highlights. Once again, my brush is running out of colour. I don't want to hit any harder. If the paint doesn't come off, it means there's none left on the tips of the bristles. And I'll just do the shadow side of that little bush. Once again, just touch off any dark colour, a piece of kitchen towel, and that will keep your brush clean. But more importantly, it'll keep your lovely highlights bright and clean as well. So I've loaded my brush with something really nice and bright red. I'll put a little bit of that on this bush. Again, just touch gently. If the paint stops coming off, stop and reload. Down in here, I think more shadow. Now, as I'm adding these highlights, I want you to start thinking about the reasons why some of the colours that Bob chose to make this concoction. Remember, I called it mud, but there's a reason Bob chose that combination of colours, because I mentioned the colour grey. Now, let me carry on adding highlights while you think of an answer. Just remember, Bob was a smart guy. He knew what he was doing. Now, before I go any further, I have to do something more with this water. Remember, I just pulled down and I left it. But we actually need to get this to look like it's got some nice little reflections and ripples going across it. For this, I'm just going to use a nice clean dry 1-inch brush and just give some light pulls across the centre here. I just want to kind of create a nice sort of blurring effect. Not sure how much of this other colour I really want to put into my painting, so I won't probably go too far to the sides. I'm just going to grab a little of that. And of course, one of the next steps is to try and pull some nice shadows in from these bushes at the top. So the question I posed you is, why did Bob use that combination of colours? Have you thought of a reason yet? Well, I'll put you out of your misery in case you didn't figure it. Is he actually wanted grey? You see, when you put any kind of a shadow effect, particularly when you use the filbert brush or a fan brush to grab some colour, you use some white paint to make some nice snow effects, you're trying to grab a little shadow. Problem is, he didn't want brown shadows, he wanted grey shadows, because no matter how much you try to think about the shadow colours being the colour of the subject, in other words, if you're painting a brown tree, the shadow is always grey or blue-grey. So I'm going to go straight into some of my grubby white colour here. I'm actually going to tint it a little bit with some blue and grey, but I think I'm okay. Just going to knock off the whiteness. Now, right at the very back here, just under these bushes, I'm going straight with my brush, and I'm going to just grab a little of this colour. And I'm hoping for a nice sort of grey colour. Don't grab any of that yellow. There you go, grab it, pull it. And look at that, we've got a nice blue-grey colour. And that's all from these bushes. As I come forwards, I'll add a little more white to my brush. Of course, we want some water too. I think at the sides we want a little bit more blue-grey colour. Tip my paint a little more. There. Wow, look at that. I think it's a little bit too blue. Go for a little touch more of that black colour into my paint. Oh, look how that kind of draws your eye to the centre of the painting a little bit more. Yes, that's just a little bit too bright blue. I don't mind this sort of blue-grey colour, but that's just too vibrant for me. I'm just going to wipe off my fan brush before I get myself into trouble. And I think I want to remove some of that colour on this side, so I'm going to pick up my palette knife and just remove some of that surplus blue paint. So you see, some quick thinking there. I stopped before I got myself too far into trouble and reset. I get a little bit of fresh white paint. Not quite so much of this blue colour, maybe a little touch more to the black side. That's the colour I'm looking for. So you see, sometimes when you're painting away, you have to sort of put the brakes on occasionally and just kind of have a little bit of a reset with your painting. And it's no bad thing just to walk away for just a second and see your painting from the other side of the room. I'll tell you whether you're on target or not. I like these colours from the sky. I'm not so keen on these really blue ones at the edges, but it's okay. You see, because the colours I'm using will absorb that tone. But there's always a tendency to sort of crush in too much and you end up gobbling up all of this lovely bright colour on the snow in here. So as you do this, it's maybe an idea to have a bit of a plan in place. Maybe put a few little markers on this so you don't lose it all. In Bob's original painting, he had some trees and bushes coming down here and they sort of cut in across here. And I haven't included those on my painting. I'm going to leave this side a little more open, but I definitely want to bring the trees down and around this side. As I mentioned, I'm going to use my brush just to put a few little markers onto my painting. So I've got a little bit of blue-grey colour here. So I want to keep some of this colour showing. So I'm just going to put on a few little marks here. Maybe there's another little bank coming out there. And maybe a little bank coming across here. So you see, by just putting on these little shadows, it gives me an idea where the snow's going to come across. And I could be doing the same thing on this side. Let's put a little shadow in here. My palette, well, it's got all sorts of colours on it, but I'm not too worried. I'm going to go back into my blue, my black, my Van Dyke dark sienna, and of course my alizarin crimson. Pull the paintbrush one direction through the paint, give it a nice little press. We really want to open this brush up. This time I'm going to turn my brush on its side. I'm going to just tap in from the edge. The idea is to create these lovely little sort of umbrella shapes I talk about in my paintings. It's where the brush really holds its shape. You can kind of create these nice little branches creeping in from the edge. Whenever I'm painting, I always have to think about some of these little trees that, well, I'm going to sacrifice. They're what I call filler trees, and it's nice to have them, but sometimes, well, they just don't make it to the final painting. But what happens if you've got a lot of paint here? You might end up making a bit of a mush. So my advice is pick up your palette knife, just knock out a couple of these little highlights, get rid of them so that they don't kind of affect your shadow colour too much. So knock off that little bit of paint and then you can go right across here and your dark colours stay nice and dark. Right, time for some more branches and a little bit more highlighting. So I've got my dark brush back. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because, well, we're going to lose an inch of this painting for the border, which means we'll end up with this really skinny tree sort of clinging to the edge of my painting. Visually, not very appealing, I don't think. We want this tree to look like it's in the painting a little bit more. So take care when you're putting on your trees that they don't end up looking like they're hanging on for dear life. If they're going to be in the painting, make them really stand out and sort of have their place, as opposed to being almost an excuse for being there. We don't want them being sorry, do we? There we are. So we've got some very nice trees in here now, a lovely sort of size. And where I put my trunk through there, which you can't see very well, it's a bit dark. If I put some foliage across it now, then it pushes the trunks back into the painting. I might also add a little bit more shadow down in here. I love the blue-purple colour, but I think we could see a little bit more vegetation poking up. So far, I've used this lovely half-round brush to do all my highlighting, and I'm going to carry on. I pulled out some yellow ochre. You see, it's nice and oily. And this time, instead of tapping the brush on edge here, I'm going to just press the brush in sideways. Make sure you can do this. You really kind of press and open the brush up. You want a really nicely opened brush. plenty of paint right on the edge of the bristles, and I'm going right into the Indian yellow here, and you can see that I've got a good amount of colour right on that very edge, but the brush completely opened up. Again, light streaming through here, so the right side of my tree is going to be getting most of this light. And as we come down, think about leaving some shadow in here as well. Reload, and I'm ready to go again. And try and paint one branch at a time. It's very tempting to just smother everything in colour. And my advice is always to leave yourself a little room to come back. If you have to add a little more, you can. Just a slight touch of red in there. I think I might put a branch or two back in here, sort of going back out of the painting. I want to leave a little shadow here next to them, paint some bushes at the base, but for that I'll have to drop the camera down a little bit. And as we come away, around into the shadows again. And I want to cover up the ends of my tree trunks as they come down. I'll put a little bit of colour through here as well. And maybe I'll just have that curving round and disappearing away into the distance. Once again, I've gone back to my fan brush with that blue colour on it. And again, just grab a little bit of that shadow from underneath these bushes and tease it out across into the water. And just grab some colour and pull it backwards and forwards. And here you see that lovely sort of purplish sort of colour I got in these bushes. Now what should we do with the opposite side? I think a nice bush here, living right on the corner, could really frame the painting up beautifully. So that's what I'm going to do. Some lovely dark colours through here, maybe a little more snow maybe, just to kind of bring this side down a little lower. For these bushes, I want a little bit more detail. So instead of just dabbing my brush and just dabbing it onto the canvas, I'm actually going to groom my brush through the paint in one direction, through the black, Van Dyke brown and blue colours. I'm going to draw my brush in one direction, pull it through and see if you can get a nice stippled effect. See on my palette there, I've got some nice sort of textures coming up. Give my brush a little bit of a push. That's what I'm looking for, that lovely sort of stippled effect. It means my brush is going to be loaded full of colour. Now, think about painting one little bush at a time. Rounded side to the top, give it a little push. See, I want these to have a little bit more detail on this. These look a little bit sort of small and plain, whereas these ones want to be full of lovely detail. And you see how I'm doing that little push and release. So you go in, you press and you release and come back to the centre again. So that's sort of look like twins. I've got sort of, but I definitely don't want to close in my water too much here. So here's my painting so far, and I'm pleased with it in the main. But whilst I like the colours and the reflections and the snow so far, it's this tree that I think looks a little bit sort of heavy. The more I study it, the more I look at the shapes of some of these branches, and particularly down in here, which looks like it's been done with thumbprints. And it's this brush that did it. Well, it's the person on the end of the brush that did it. You see, when you've got a brush that holds a particularly sort of specific sort of shape, and you use it that way every time, you get these things, which are thumbprints. And I should have been using my brush at a different angle. Now, I encourage you to go back and look at your own paintings. And if you sort of see something and think, well, that could have been better, don't just live with it. Come back and improve it. Rework specific areas of your painting and see if you can improve upon them. So, time to redarken all this because I can't get the paint off, it's dry. And I'm going to redo this entire section with some fresh highlights and a little bit more of a delicate touch. I've replaced my previous palette and I've remixed my colour. This time I'm going to do the underpainting using this old Bob Ross 1-inch landscape brush. And again, I'm just going to pull the paint in one direction instead of just dabbing into the paint. I'm actually going to be pushing up to get a little bit more of a shape to my brush. I want to just get a nice line of paint right across the bristles. You see what I'm doing? Just get a nice little line. And I'm just going to overpaint this. And I'm going to tip the brush on a corner and simply reshape my tree. Not with these heavy, thick branches, but with something a little more delicate. And I don't mind if a little bit of this original colour sort of comes peeking through in places. It's just the shape of my tree that I want to improve. Now the bit I really want to get rid of is these really bad looking thumbprint bushes I did down here. Oh no, they weren't that great, were they? These ones, oh, I could almost live with them. They do look a bit like a hedge, but oh well. It's right at the very edge of the camera, and I'm very tempted to go off the top here. Yep, I think I will paint off the top of my canvas because, let's say, once you get to within sort of half an inch or so, it starts to look a bit strange, especially when the tape comes off. And you think, did you really mean to stop just short? There. Now I think I can put some highlights on here, but I don't think I'll be using this brush. I think I might use another one of these brushes with some delicate highlights on. Let's see how we get on. So I've put out some fresh highlighting colours, and this time again I'm using a 1-inch landscape brush, not the half round brush, and I'm going to go back into some of my Indian yellow, cadmium yellow. Remember, reflections of gold, so we want a lovely warm golden colour, a touch of ochre in there too. And I think I'm going to add a little bit more of that white just to brighten up the edges. And once again, pull your paint out, make a nice little curtain of colour, and then load your brush by pressing back. Create a lovely little line of paint in the brush, in the palette. And when you do that and you push in with your brush, you want to favour that right corner, because this is where the light's coming from. So I'm going to just tip my brush slightly to the right hand side. I'm going to favour these outside tips. Just gently touch and create that lovely delicate highlighting effect that we're looking for, that I didn't quite get right with the last painting. If you pick up any dark, top tip, touch it off on a paper towel. Don't forget, reload your brush often, because once it starts to lose that sort of delicacy, once you can't get the highlights to come off easily, there's a temptation you might just start hammering on the painting, and that's when you can really end up creating those big heavy clumps. And look at those little delicate brush strokes I got into there. Now, I'm just going to carry on adding these little delicate touches of highlight, one little branch at a time, wiping off any dark. And another little top tip for you here is that quite often I find when I'm painting away that the more I use my brush and load it and reload it, it starts to hold its shape a little better. So the first few brush strokes might be a little, well, not perfect. And with a little more time and just a few more touches of paint, suddenly it starts to hold its shape a little better. It just takes time for the bristles to warm up. They come after a few more minutes of loading your brush. But look how I can get these beautiful delicate branches now to appear on my painting that were missing in the previous version. Little bits of paint. There's a nice branch coming through here. Reload my brush. And then just do these lovely little fingers of foliage as they come forwards. And I very quickly seem to have my painting done once more. It only took a few minutes, but I think the end result was well worth the extra few minutes it took me to do it. I think I've recovered this tree quite nicely, and I'll just live with this down here. But it's time to do these bushes down here in the corner. And for this, maybe a different technique. Now, before I go jumping in, finishing off my painting, I remembered I should do something more with this snow. This blue colour is lovely, it's a lovely reflection, but I think some of this sky colour would come through here. I would see the odd little pop of brightness on the snow. And for that, I'm going to suggest using maybe a smaller brush. Bob, of course, would use a filbert brush, which would work lovely. But if you've got a small brush like this, the small rounds or a little flat brush or even a dagger brush, these would work really nicely too. And I'm probably going to stick with a Bob Ross brush for this. And I put out a little bit of fresh white. Take a small amount of it, just a little touch. Is it too white? It's pretty sparkly, isn't it? Maybe I would just tint it with a tiny touch of ochre. If you've ever seen me paint seascapes, you know that I tint my white with some ochre, and somehow it makes the colour even sharper and brighter than it would do normally. Now, think about that light trail we spoke about in the early part of this painting, how the light's going to catch some points of this snow, maybe a little zing of light on the water. Think about bushes and where they could cast a shadow. Now, remember that my painting's been sitting for a couple of days, so this colour is really quite dry. So I can just literally just let my brush just graze the surface and leave just a little suggestion of a highlight. Here you can see what I wanted to do is before I got to this piece, because if this was wet, then I'd pick up all sorts of colours. Look at that, just leaving a little zinger of light on this snow. Way of brightness until you get to about here. And all I'm doing is I'm just taking my brush, just dragging it on its side. I haven't added any more paint to my brush. I'm just literally using whatever was left over. Smooth that back a little more. And so you can create some amazing detail just by dragging a brush across the canvas. I just put a little bit more paint on my brush. Just a little pop. I think we almost could expect to see a little extra brightness on the water as well. Just a touch. That just lifts the snow a little away from the water. Doesn't take much, just a little. I'm going to put some highlights on these bushes at long last. Of this, instead of pushing my brush into the paint, I want to drag it through in one direction. And I always tend to use that rounded side as the guide. I find when I pull it through in one direction, I can round my brush over and get a nice rounded end to it. Give it a little push, give it a little push. And that pushing action, what it does is it sort of makes my brush sort of form a nice haircut. It has a lovely shape to it. And I want the brightest point at the very top. Now, I just put that snow behind there, but not too much paint. This should stick nice and easily. So you get these lovely bright highlights. And because this dark underpaint is, well, pretty much dry now, it means my colour will stick. And as I run out of paint, I can just move somewhere else in the painting. I'm not really picking up much in the way of colour. Just add another little bush in here. And the secret is not to kill all these lovely darks. It's so tempting to want to fill this up with colour and just completely smother all those lovely darks. And that's kind of the downfall, really. A little something on the end here. Oh yeah, there we go. And with that, I think this part of my painting is complete. Now time for the big reveal. And there we have it, Reflections of Gold, my version of the Bob Ross classic, and one I think you should try painting next. So you have it, Reflections of Gold, a painting with lots of pickles and mistakes. But in the end, we got there with a lovely painting. Now, don't move, there's some more lovely paintings for you to watch coming right along. Happy painting, everybody!